This video is brought to you by Epic Games. What's up, Wisecrack? Michael here. Do you ever wonder what's happening in your subconscious when you're sleeping? Have you ever struggled to trace the origin of an idea or thought that you've had? And have you ever considered purchasing an international airline to help you effectively pull off a dream heist? Well, on this episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Brilliant, we'll get into all of this and more by breaking down the 2010 film Inception. In this film, we watch a team of expert dream thieves pull off an elaborate heist that involves implanting an idea 3 dreams deep into the consciousness of an unsuspecting rich dude. Things get very weird, an evil dream ghost tries to thwart their plans, and at the end, we don't know what's real and what's not. To help me avoid getting trapped in limbo, I am joined by Jared.
Michael, you son of a I'm in.
Oh, I love it. We're gonna have some fun, darling. Okay, Jared, so Inception is I think we could say, multi-layered and pretty complex film.
Yes.
I'm excited that you're gonna help me break it down even more. But let's start by talking about what's good. So what is something that you think is good about the movie Inception?
Well, you already just said complex, and I would say that it's a complicated film and it's a complex film. I say complicated because I think that just discerning what happens on a very basic plot level is pretty challenging. And one of the most special things about this movie is that it makes people want to go to that coffee shop and discuss the movie, break it down layer by layer. But I also think it's a very complex film because it really does invite multiple interpretations. And I think that's the mark of a really special movie. But I think this movie really is, for a younger generation than myself, kind of the Matrix of that generation, because it makes you question reality. It makes you question whether or not you can tell the difference between dreaming and sleeping, like Descartes or something like that. And it's also a reminder that original and challenging ideas can still be accepted and celebrated on a wide scale. And that's something that we unfortunately get so rarely, that The Matrix was also proof of. This movie actually made way more money than The Matrix, so this was just kind of a big celebratory moment for all fans of cranial, geeky sci-fi and stuff like that. So this movie has a special place in my heart just because it's just another necessary movie that had to happen to say, no, we can invest in original ideas, we can invest in things that seem challenging. There was an urban legend that nobody even knew what the movie was about when it was being produced. Like, not even the actors knew what was happening. Another thing I find pretty impressive about this movie is the opening scene, because a lot of this movie, just by nature of how complicated it is needs exposition to even understand how the rules work. But that opening scene introduces us to so many things, whether it's the fact that when you get shot, you wake up in a dream, or the idea of multiple dream levels, or the idea of how Cobb's trauma with his wife manifests in endangering missions and stuff like that.
And even like the kick, right? I think we get that in
and
the
we get the kick.
Yeah.
All of that is established through action. And I think it's so important to do that first before we get into the big information dump section, because that first part is just so exciting. And so I think it's really clever how he structured that.
No, I think you're right. And in rewatching it for the first time in a while, I was struck by everything you just said and how bold the first scene is. Like, how much they really jump into it, and the boldness of Nolan to start a movie that's taking place inside of a dream when we don't know what's inside of a dream yet, and letting that unfold. It's great.
You don't know what's going on, but damn, are you curious?
Yeah,
I mean,
to riff off something you said, and especially the Matrix comparison, something I like about this movie that might sound negative, but I mean in a positive way, it inspired a lot of dorm room philosophy. And by dorm room philosophy, kind of similar to what you talked about with coffee shops, thinking of the sort of movies that inspire deep discussion about what it really means and the questioning of reality, and things that maybe you're going to talk about this in concert with some books you're reading, or maybe you're just throwing around ideas while you're stoned with your buddies. But I think this movie inspires a lot of those big questions. And I think a lot of the best films of that kind of Matrix and Inception genre do that. Inspire thought, inspire questions, and leave a lot of things up in the air. And I think this movie definitely does that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the other things I think that he does so well is create a system of rules. This movie is all about establishing rules, and then for better or worse, it takes a long time to establish these rules, but the rules really do work in concert with the way that we experience dreams. The idea of nesting time within dreams. That's something that, we can fall asleep for an hour, but it feels like we've almost lived an entire lifetime. That's the first time we ever saw that in a movie, and that was really special.
Oh yeah, well, in rewatching it, I was pausing to take notes of the rules. So like, okay, If you're one level, this is how much time. If you're two levels, this is how much time. And even like keeping track of where they were, what they were doing, and the rules of that place. It's kind of demanding, and on first watch, I think it's easy to not pay attention to that. But it is interesting that when you rewatch this film, you can pay more attention, go deeper, and try your best to understand the rules of the unconscious as outlined by Christopher Nolan.
Just the premise of this movie is probably the coolest thing about it.
Yeah.
I mean, just that a dream thief enters your mind in order to incept you or extract the most powerful thing in the world, an idea. I mean, even just that log line, if someone were to pitch that to me, I'd be like, okay, great, but how are you going to actually make that into a movie? And I think that the ambition of the idea does show in just how many genres this movie has to juggle. I mean, it's a drama. We get the love drama between Mal and Cobb. It's a heist movie. It's an action movie. And all of them work in concert to create something that even if you're not aware of what's going on at each second, it still builds to a moment of catharsis that works, whether or not you're able to say what exactly is happening in the snow level, because there are a lot of dramatic beats that go by so quickly. But one of the great things about Nolan is that he doesn't really care much to hold the audience's hand through plot points, because he's very aware that there are so many other things in the filmmaker's toolkit, whether it's sound design or composition or things like that, that will communicate the stakes more so than dialogue. I remember when the trailer for The Dark Knight Rises came out and no one could understand what Bane said. Sorry, it wasn't the trailer. It was before Mission Impossible 4, there was like the extended intro or something that they showed.
No one cared who I was till I put on the mask.
And he defended himself against people who said, this is stupid, we can't understand what Bane said. And he said, it doesn't really matter if you can actually understand every single word, because the general tone or the context or the atmosphere that I've built will give you enough information. And people made fun of him for it, and he eventually did cave and concede and re-record those Bane lines. But that's always something that I've admired about Nolan, is that he's willing to challenge the audience to the point where even his editor says that people don't understand his movies, meaning that he's going through and putting in beats that are seconds long, knowing that it will go straight past the audience's head, but it doesn't matter, because they're going to understand that the stakes are rising. They understand the overarching stakes, but not necessarily the specific beats, and it still works.
I also think at a more basic level, it's just such a visually stunning film.
Absolutely.
It's so styled. Everyone looks so cool in it as well. So it's a fun world to be in.
It's a fun world to be in, and it's just so impressive how they created 4 different color palettes to express 4 different worlds. And from what I understand, there was no actual coloring in post-production. All of that was done in camera, just because Christopher Nolan is a purist and he levels these kinds of ridiculous challenges at himself just to be the best. And I think it pays off, because more to my point about not needing the dialogue to necessarily communicate every plot point, he can just do that visually. Because a lot of this movie is juxtaposing between different dream levels, and the fact that you can tell visually that they're distinct from one another. Like, one of them is raining, one of them is colored a little bit more blue than the other one of them has much more of like a warm reddish hue inside that hotel. And so we're constantly able to understand what's going on.
Something I like about the film is even when it doesn't work, it's still good. And for that, I mean, even at times where I wonder if that plot is collapsing onto itself, if certain threads aren't coming together the way he wants them to, that never gets in the way of the movie being so visually impressive and compelling. The part of the movie that I think gets at this really well is the fight scene that takes place in the spinning hallway.
Oh, it's the best shot of the movie.
Yeah, and the fact that they constructed that, and I think that commitment to not, I don't want to say cheaping out, because I know movies cost so much money to make, but rather than doing effects in post or CGI or whatever, building an entire spinning hallway to do that pays off so well.
I've seen that set, and it's very reminiscent of the set that they built for 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the woman walks up the circular hallway.
I think that's just a great thing about Nolan films in general. I mean, not to veer too much, but like, it's something that worked really well in Dunkirk. The fact that he made a lot of that stuff actually happen, and insisted on having actual effects and not doing everything in post, it really pays off in the intensity of the film. But before we continue, I want to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, House Party, a free to download app linked in the description. If you're feeling bored and want to connect with friends, House Party is a fun app that allows you to call them and play games while you hang out. The app features Heads Up, Chips and Guac, Quick Draw, and my personal favorite, Trivia. They even give you fun facts while you wait for your party to join the call. Add friends via contacts, Facebook, and even Snapchat to get the party started. 8 friends can be in the same room at once, and the more people, the more fun the games. You can even invite friends who don't have each other's contacts into the mix. It's a great way to stay connected during times when friends and family feel so far away. So change up the quarantine conversation and download House Party today. House Party is free to download and available on iOS, Android, macOS, and Chrome. Click the link in the description to download the app. Now, back to the show. Okay, I'm sure we could go on and talk about more things we like about this movie, but we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't also consider what doesn't work in Inception. So, give me something that you think is bad about this movie.
You know, bad is kind of a hard term to level at this movie, but there are things that I think are a little bit disappointing. And I think one of it is that some of the biggest action set pieces, the most impressive ones, the most visually stunning ones, are only for the sake of exposition. So for example, the streets of Paris exploding when DiCaprio is explaining to Ellen Page how dreams work. That's really just something that teaches the audience how dreams work, but man, I would love to see that kind of explosion happening during an action sequence where the tension is high. More so with the whole thing with the city folding in upon itself. That's the coolest, most iconic visual, except for maybe the Joseph Gordon-Levitt hallway scene, which we talked about, but at a close second is the city folding in on itself, which is such a cool thing, and I would love to see Leonardo DiCaprio being chased by somebody with a folded over city. But again, it's just shown almost as pure spectacle, because another thing that's a little bit disappointing about this movie is the rule that he establishes that your subconscious will come attack you if you change the world too much. And the only reason for that is because I think it inhibits the creativity of what can happen when they're actually in the dream. So again, I would love to see Ariadne just constantly creating throughout that, like she's playing a video game, like she's playing Dreams, that new game that's out for PlayStation 4 or whatever. So much of this movie is a celebration of the creative process, and not being able to see Ariadne doing her architecture is kind of a missed opportunity, I think.
Yeah, and I think that emphasis on the movie spending too much time on exposition makes sense of a lot of the flaws. So one thing that I don't really like about the movie is that, you know, Ariadne is like really the only female character that isn't just like in Leonardo DiCaprio's unconscious in the film. And her main role in this movie is to ask why. Almost everything she says in this movie is like, why does this work like this way? How does this happen this way?
I mean, you gotta draw from stuff you know, right?
Only use details, a street lamp or a phone booth, never entire areas.
Why not?
Because building a dream from your memory is the easiest way to lose your grasp on what's real and what is a dream.
Is that what happened to you?
She's there to sort of represent the audience asking what the hell is happening right now.
Because there's so much to establish.
Yeah, and it's just sort of a waste of a really interesting character. Now, still a good character, Ellen Page crushes in that role, but I would have liked to see more in that particular role right there.
And I think a lot of that could have been achieved if you just made her character a little bit more active and given the architect role less of a, well, she already did the work before the actual heist starts, which is how it works now, and actually have her building throughout the dream. By the way, that train sequence, I would have loved to have seen more stuff like that. I mean, seeing a train with no track just plowing through downtown Los Angeles when it's raining, that is such a cool image.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see more kind of Satoshi Kon Paprika level crazy stuff in a dream. You know, I don't know about your dreams, Michael. My dreams get pretty weird. And
well, we might get to that later, so I won't let you go too deep into that one. But something you mentioned before was the way in which Christopher Nolan establishes so many rules. Now, this is a point where I get how that works for the sake of the film. I do think there's a missed opportunity in the exploration of the unconscious and dreams in particular. So one of the things about dreams, and especially if we're thinking about like the psychoanalytic tradition, is they're not linear. They're pretty weird. The rules of reality don't apply. So I wonder if there was a more interesting place to go, both with the story and even visually, kind of as you referenced before, to make those dreams pop, to really push the limits of that. I get how that would have complicated an already complicated film a lot more, but that is something that I couldn't help but think about when watching this film again.
One other thing that we mentioned in the good section, but I think it could almost equally work as bad, is the fact that even the editor of the film says that people don't know what's going on in his movies. And I think that for most part, for most of the dream levels, I was I think, beat for beat following what was going on, but I think everything kind of goes to hell with the snow level. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Tom Hardy's character and the guy who plays Saito, they're all masked up, so it's really hard to follow who is doing what. But also just the number of changes and beats that happen in that scene. There are so many, and some of them are communicated with just like the smallest bit of dialogue. So it can be a little bit frustrating, but again, it mostly works for those other elements that I mentioned before.
Yeah. The other thing I don't like, and this is very minor, I don't like that the main, not motivation for Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Cobb, but the reason they get into this heist to begin with is so some super billionaire guy can stop another company from competing with him.
Right.
And there's the line about like, oh, there'd be an energy monopoly. It's like, my guy, you just bought an airline to do this heist. I just don't think, like, to try to moralize it in some way, like, this is like, oh, great, we're breaking up the big corporations. Like, come on. And I get Cobb's motivation, wants to see his kids get back to America, but also the why can't you just take the kids to France? I won't get into that.
They have this off-screen character of the shrewd mother-in-law that they
Yes.
kind of have that establishes like why they can't go to France.
Grandma says you're never coming back.
And then too, like, she's presumably married to the Michael Caine character, and he's like, I'll hang out with the guy that everyone thinks killed my daughter. My wife, though, she's out on that. But there's some loose ends. It is what it is. This movie doesn't try to explain all those things. I'm nitpicking a bit. Before we move on, any other thing that's bad about this movie that you wanted to bring up?
I think you had already brought up that Ariadne is basically just an expository tool.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just want to reiterate that I think her character had the potential to be the most active and cool character, but she played a necessary role that I understand.
Yeah.
Again, creating this whole complex, complicated world within 2.5 hours, you're going to have to implement some sort of a tool like that to make sure that the audience is getting all the information that they need, not only with how the world works, but also with Cobb's past, because so much of the romance between Cobb and Maul is just flashbacks, and we need some sort of motivation for that flashback, unless you just want Leonardo DiCaprio looking in a mirror and then we just fade to white and then we see a flashback,
sounds
which,
good too.
you know, I don't know. I think that would feel a little bit strange for a movie made in 2010.
Yeah, but I think the main takeaway from all this is almost everything we said that was bad, except some of the minor points, are necessary evils of what makes the movie good.
Right.
So if you're gonna have bad stuff in your film, have it work to make the film good. So I think we agree on that. Done good, done bad. I know you're excited to get to the brilliant, where we break down the big ideas, but first we got to do the lightning round.
Okay.
So I assume you came with questions.
I
prepared.
came with questions. Michael, if you could incept your girlfriend with any idea, what would it be?
Oh, that's so real. I would make her like live music more. I love going to concerts, and she doesn't like coming with me because sometimes she gets anxious in like crowds. So I would incept her with that idea that she needed to like be out at more live music, and that'd be so much fun.
Nice.
If you see this, I'm sorry. I would never really do that. I would never. What is the weirdest dream you've had that you remember that you can comfortably say in this context?
Man, I once had a dream that I was fighting the whole cast of Mortal Kombat and I was losing. And it was a bad dream.
That's dark.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you survived. The kick in that one must have been very real.
Yeah, it was bad. I mean, no fatalities, luckily.
Nice.
If you had to extract a piece of knowledge from one person living today, who would it be and what would you extract?
Okay, so in some of the original hot chicken shops in Nashville, Prince's and Bolton's, they have these spice mixes that they don't tell anyone what they are. They're very militant about this. It'd be cool to extract the spice mix to the original style of Nashville hot chicken.
Instead of corporate espionage, small business espionage.
Oh, now I feel really bad. I wouldn't do that. I would extract Jeff Bezos'
No,
PIN
that
number and
was-
steal all his money. Oh,
No, that was
businesses.
a great answer. If you could live an extra lifetime with a loved one in the span of 1 second of this lifetime, would you do it?
No.
Why not?
Well, in the sample size of the film, 50% of the people that went down that road killed themselves because of the way it ravaged their psyche. So I just think if we're doing reward analysis, I just think it's worth it.
Well, hold on. That person killed themselves because they were incepted with the idea to question their reality, and they just kept questioning their reality.
That's fair. Here's what I still think. I think that one of the joys of life is its finitude. And I think that because we know that life's about a certain amount of time, but if I go do 50 years and then I come back and I got to live a bunch longer, I could technically get up to the point in my life where my lived experience is like 130 years. I'm going to be bored as shit at that point.
Yeah.
What do you think is Christopher Nolan's best movie?
The Dark Knight.
Great.
That
Simple
one
as that.
As simple as that. If Nolan was hired to direct the next installment of a known franchise, which one would you want it to be and why?
Ooh, this is fun. See, I know that this movie is already being made, so this is obviously could never happen. I mean, let him do a Matrix movie.
Ooh.
Let him do like a second
Gosh, I never
Matrix
even
trilogy.
thought about that.
And I think his aesthetics and storytelling would actually work better.
I'm excited to see what Lana comes up with
Yeah.
The Matrix 4, but I might even be more excited if Nolan took
Oh
over.
god, I think that would be the level of excitement. I think if they announced Christopher Nolan was going to do a Matrix movie, through the roof.
Yeah. With Lana's supervision, maybe.
Yeah, of course, with supervision or just blessing.
Yeah.
Okay, Jared, if you were a part of the Dream Heist team, what skill would you bring?
Whatever Eames does, whatever Tom Hardy's guy does, to inhabit
yeah.
the other characters. I guess he's kind
Yeah.
of like the actor in the
Yeah,
Dream
I think he's like
Heist
the
team.
forger, but he
Right.
forges people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be fun.
That was really fun, and he killed it. Okay, I like that. I think that's a good role.
Yeah.
You got another one for me?
I do, and this is kind of a trick question. Ready?
No.
This is possibly going to offend some people, but who is Nolan's most interesting female character?
This is so messed up. I think Maggie Gyllenhaal's character in The Dark Knight, very good, pretty fleshed out. I think the reason it's hard to answer this question is because Christopher Nolan does a bad job of creating interesting roles for women in his films. It is what it is.
I don't think he tries very hard because he just knows
Yeah.
that that's not his strength, and I'm fine with that. Some dudes are just dude-centric, and I'm cool with that.
I don't know. I would like him to try better. We'll see. It does not look like anytime soon this will be happening.
There's no good Christopher Nolan sex scenes. It's because he's a cranial guy. He's not a sexy guy. Let him run in his lane.
I've heard he's never had sex. I've heard that Christopher Nolan is an adult virgin who's never had sex, lives in a sexless marriage, and his children are via the extraction from his testicles directly implanted into his wife to have kids. Never had sex. Tell everyone. Well, this has been a fun lightning round, and
Yeah.
thank you for participating in
Absolutely.
it. And now that we've done good, bad, and lightning round, it's time to get into the big ideas in this film, the stuff that makes you think. So we'll get into the brilliant, and you can start us off by telling us what's something about Inception that you think is brilliant.
Well, I mentioned this already a little bit in the good section, but I really admire how this film inspires so many different interpretations. And there's one in particular that I've glommed onto that even in interviews Christopher Nolan has been approached about, and that is how Inception is about the creative process of making a film. Have you heard about this?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so there's something very brilliant in how there's a scene where Cobb is explaining to Ariadne how the logic of dreams work, and he says,
You never really remember the beginning of a dream, do you? You always wind up right in the middle of what's going on.
I guess, yeah.
and what a lot of people have interpreted this as being as Nolan pointing to the fact that sometimes a scene will just start and you're in the middle of a conversation. You don't know how they got there, just like they don't know how they got to this place in the dream world.
Yeah.
And so this opens up a whole awesome world of questions about this movie. So when we cut to things like the establishing shot of Mombasa, we ask ourselves like, okay, well, there was some narrative ellipses there. So does that mean that we're supposed to question whether this is a dream or not? And then it really draws this really interesting comparison to how the logic of movies works like the logic of dreams. So every time we see something like when they're in Mombasa and DiCaprio is being chased, he's running through an alleyway that narrows to almost a point. And then you're saying to yourself now, is that just something that a filmmaker is using its film logic to just heighten the stakes, or is it an indication that it's a dream? And then Saito all of a sudden just shows up. Well, what is he doing there? And then we ask ourselves, well, is that just convenient movie logic, or is that the logic of dreams? And this comparison I've always thought was just so brilliant. And as a film lover, and one of the greatest things about Christopher Nolan is that he's a film lover, it's just a really amazing love letter to cinema. And it's interesting that in a great Wired article that I recommend everybody read, they interview Christopher Nolan and they actually ask him if this is what he was thinking when he was writing the movie, and he said no, but it's clearly there. And he actually has this great quote that speaks to a lot of what we do. He says, one of the things that you do as a writer and as a filmmaker is grasp for resonant symbols and imagery without necessarily fully understanding it yourself. There are interpretations to be imposed on the film that aren't necessarily what I had in my head. And it doesn't even have to be necessarily an interpretation of what's real or not. Is Cobb dreaming at the end or not? But these meta readings about the creative process that are so unique to this story about dreams and creation that I just find really special.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I read the article you're talking about as well. Everyone should. It's good. And I think Nolan's ability to be like, this might not be what I intended, but yeah, it's also true, is really great.
Yeah.
And I think it almost acknowledges like the unconsciousness of a filmmaker who's doing stuff, maybe not even realizing he's doing it, which kind of leads into the thing I find the most brilliant in this film. And not that this is something it's intentionally doing throughout, but something that's really interesting to think about is the theme and the function of repression. So of course, Mal in a lot of ways is a repressed symptom of trauma in Cobb's unconscious, something that's happened that was horrible, that he's pushed down so far, but the repression wants to get out. Now, this is something that's in a lot of ways can be pulled right from Sigmund Freud. So I have a quote here. This was when Freud first introduced the category of repression, and he said, and this is him talking about patients he was seeing, says there was some force that prevented them from becoming conscious and compelled them to remain unconscious. Pushed the pathogenetic experiences in question out of consciousness. I gave the name of repression to this hypothetical process. So repression for Freud is when something happens that our mind sort of puts away for us, tries to keep down, but the repressed memory keeps trying to like break into our conscious mind. And sort of disrupts patterns. That's why a lot of times people might experience trauma as a child or some horrific event, and they push it down, and it might be 30 years later that that's popping up and haunting them. And I think that through the Mal character, the film explores that idea in a really interesting way. And even if we read the film or that part as sort of a metaphor, it's reminding us that past trauma can be ghosts, these things that haunt us, these things that we can't get rid of. And even if they don't actually exist as specters, they're already deeply inside our unconscious mind, which is wild to think about, because all of us have things like that floating around our subconscious mind that we're not aware of, that might pop up at any point. And I think the movie gets at the implications of that in a really interesting way.
We actually have an actual physical embodiment of his trauma who is messing with his life and having your trauma be the antagonist of the film, or at least of select scenes, is something really cool.
Oh, definitely. And I think kind of connected to that, there's some fun ideas to pick apart in terms of how memory functions. Because I at least wonder when I watch this film, how much of what that Cobb, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, is remembering about Mal actually happened, how much of that is shaped by his own remembering of his memories. And something we know, sort of a psychological and neurological level, we do this weird thing where we have a thing that happened to us, we remember that, but by re-remembering it, we can modify it, we can change it. So eventually we get further on, and as adults, we have to acknowledge that some of our childhood memories might have drifted pretty far away from what actually happened. So you wonder that in the film as well, how much of the reinscription of these memories is shaping then who Mal is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what he discovers at the end when he decides not to stay with Mal in limbo, first and foremost, is because he realized that she's just a shade of the full woman that he once lived with.
Yeah, and there's something that's so real and melancholic about that, because in our own lives, like people, whether it's friends we just don't see anymore, or people who have passed, the memory of the person is never quite the person. It's always a shell of something real. So I really liked that level of exploring how memory functions. What else did you find brilliant?
So I'm going to go back to the meta reading about film, because as a film lover, this is the one that resonates with me the most. But on top of the fact that the logic of dreams run parallel to the logic of cinema, something really interesting is that the whole idea of incepting somebody with an idea of planting a seed of thought in someone's head as something that cinema does to people that view it, I find to be really awesome, because that's something that's actually happened to me. I mean, I've made vlogs on this channel before about how The Matrix changed my life, and virtually the Wachowskis went into multiple layers of my subconscious and planted that idea to question things, and that came to define me, just like it came to define Mal, just how it came to define Fisher at the end of the movie. And so being able to think about the creative process in this kind of high stakes spy-like scenario is just so satisfying.
Yeah, and that's another thing I was thinking about as well, is this notion of the genesis of ideas. Where do ideas come from? And the complicated way in which most ideas that we consider self-generated still relate back to something else, are still built on top of other ideas or the seeds of other things. And often those things do come from the media we consume, the films we're watching, the books we're reading, who we're talking to. So I think that begs a lot of interesting questions and just provides a lot of food for thought, really. So now that we have talked about it at multiple levels, we have to take all of that intricate discussion and reduce everything down to a 3-option rating system. We have to decide, is Inception good, bad, or brilliant? Jared, what is it?
I think it is very good. I'm not willing to quite give it the brilliant because, once again, I think that the film does buckle under the weight of its own ambition, but that is to say that it swings for the fences and basically hits most of the marks. I will say that some of the Ariadne stuff is a little bit of a bummer. I think that it's a bummer that it takes an hour to get into the action of the actual heist, no matter how you cut it. And I think that although in a lot of heist movies the exposition is supposed to be pretty exciting, this is something that was trying to balance a drama and a heist movie, so a lot of that first hour isn't as exciting as it is so much an information dump. So that's the only thing that makes me say that the film isn't, brilliant or like a masterpiece. And it's not my favorite Nolan movie, but I will say that it's very good.
Oh, that was great. I'm going to differ a little bit. I'm going to say it's like average good.
Okay.
Just straight up good. And for me, it is the Ariadne stuff mixed with the fact that I still think parts of this movie don't make sense. And I want it to make more sense than it does. Maybe that's just me. It's something I do want to rewatch. I will watch it again. But for me, it's just good.
Yeah.
But not bad. Similar, you're just on a little higher end of good than I am.
Yeah.
But either way, I think we both agree that if anyone hasn't seen this movie,
It's worth the watch, 1,000%.
definitely watch it.
Yeah.
So a new thing we're doing is recommending some reading or viewing. If someone was into this movie, into some of the ideas from it, we'll tell them something to look into. So I can start with you. Is there anything you think someone that enjoyed the movie and enjoyed this discussion could read or watch if they wanted to dive a little bit deeper?
Yeah, so a couple years ago we did a Wisecrack edition on Inception and talked about this reading about it being about movies and dreams, and there's actually a film theorist / film editor. His name is Walter Murch. He edited Apocalypse Now. He edited, I believe, The Godfather. He's a very famous editor, and he wrote this book called In the Blink of an Eye, and he has a whole chapter on how the logic of film and the logic of dreams parallel each other. That works really well with how this movie functions. So In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Murch, I recommend.
Oh, that's fantastic. Mine is a book. Not that exciting, I guess. But if anyone really liked the exploration of memory and the unconscious, and especially the theme of repression, I recommend that you check out Sigmund Freud's 5 Lectures on Psychoanalysis. And this is one of the series of lectures where Freud gets into the idea of repression. So I think if you liked the Mall character, if you liked what was going on inside of Leonardo DiCaprio or Cobb's mind, it could be a book that you enjoy.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, this has been really fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Now, normally I would ask where we could find someone. People know where to go if they want more Jared in their lives.
Yeah, you're already there.
This has been the good, the bad, and the brilliant on Inception. Thank you so much for watching. And please let us know in the comments if there's other properties you would love to see us cover in the future. We'll see you next time.
Peace, guys.